Hi everyone, welcome to the Sports Talk Tech podcast. I'm your host Deon. We have a number of things to cover on today's episode. We'll talk Tobi Amusan. We'll talk about the state of Manchester United. We'll dive deep into college football in the United States and discuss the coach prime effect. All that and more in today's show. So it's important that you subscribe because this podcast will cover a variety of sports, and I'm here to give my opinion, to break down controversial issues, to also sometimes bring to your attention issues that may sometimes go under the radar. So I hope you enjoy this, and let's get into it. All right, so let's start with Tobi Amusan, the world record holder over 100-meter hurdles, the world champion from Eugene, I think Diamond League champion 3 years in a row, a woman that last year really, in many people's mind, lived up to her potential, transcended the sport somewhat, but even more importantly, because when I talk to my colleagues in Nigeria and connections there about her impact, they see it as something greater because a country of their size now having a world champion, maybe the development of the sport can start to be reconsidered, and maybe they start to produce a lot more athletes, a lot more quality athletes than they are currently doing. As you know, Nigeria has a lot of athletes. Maybe they don't perform the way you might want them to do, but many of them are now in the US collegiate system, and maybe it's only a matter of time you start to see a lot more. But back to Tobi. So Tobi, as many people know, earlier this year, she had revealed on her social media, just before the Athletic Integrities Unit put out a statement saying that she was going to be, or she has been provisionally banned for whereabouts violations. And so to be banned for whereabouts violations, for those who aren't familiar, and bear with me if you are familiar with this, it means that in a calendar year, you cannot miss 3 tests. That is, as an elite athlete or any athlete that has been elevated to the regular testing pool, they've garnered that status, they're subject to out-of-competition tests. For a number of reasons, out-of-competition tests are important, namely because if you want to preserve the integrity of the sport of track and field, or understanding the scientific research on behavior in terms of cheating and when people might most likely want to violate the integrity of the sport by introducing performance enhancing drugs or techniques, they do this out of competition. Most people will not go into a major championship like the Olympics, the World Championships, or when they're regularly performing on the circuit and take something that they could risk being caught. Now, we've seen people being caught all the time. That's not a new phenomenon. But this hones into this idea that one should be able to find an athlete unannounced and test them. That increases the likelihood that they won't be taking something, right? It's a deterrence mechanism, you might think. It's also to check, obviously, to make sure that the sport is clean. And so we have a system in which athletes need to make clear their whereabouts. If you're a track and field athlete, World Athletics, the governing body, has charged the Athletics Integrity Unit with overseeing the rules, the protocols as it relates to anti-doping. Obviously in partnership with WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency. Now back to Tobi Amusan. So she gets nicked for missing 3 tests in a calendar year, which effectively means that drug testers went to find her at a place that she stated she would have been, and they couldn't. So this is the initial way in which someone can get caught up in a whereabouts, because you have to update what's known as the atoms. You put where you're going to be, where you should be sleeping, where you train, all the necessary types of information that gets updated over time. You can frequently change it. But it gives testers an indication that you might be in X, and that allows them to just give you a surprise visit. So, to cut the story short, Tobi provisionally suspended for this. It comes out later saying she's clean, she hadn't been caught using anything, which all are true. She was subsequently tested after these encounters. And she enters in a period where the time from when this provisional suspension occurs and the World Championships in Budapest is pretty short. But she requests, and she was granted, a speedy hearing by the disciplinary tribunal, which is an independent mechanism in place. So nobody at World Athletics should have say over that. SEBCO, you name it. The AIU doesn't have say over it. There's a process for when you've been charged, and it goes to a next stage to allow a judicial process, if you want to think about it that way, to take place in an ethical way, following the rules, so on. It's a whole process. And so Tobi gets to go in front of this tribunal, obviously with her lawyers, and she's cleared. And so she was allowed to compete. This is at the 9th hour, just before the World Championships recently concluded in Budapest happened. Immediately after that occurred, the AIU put out a statement saying they were in disagreement with the tribunal's decision to allow her to compete, and also that they would consider filing an appeal, which would ultimately mean that if they were to file an appeal, it would go to the Court for Arbitration for Sport, CAS. That's a regular process. That's an appellate court, if you want to think about it in that kind of language. And so you don't know for sure if this is going to occur. You could speculate, but we have no details at that point. Tobi goes to the World Championship. Clearly cannot be in a state of pure mental preparation, I would think, or given all of this, the weight of being accused of something, even if you didn't take drugs. But the accusation, as we know, and I'll break them down, and it's nothing new, is when you're thought of being, when someone isn't taking the tests, or whether it's carelessness, it could be carelessness, you overslept, you didn't update your atoms. People hardly think on those lines. They tend to think the general disposition is that you're deliberately hiding. Maybe you miss one. Okay, we could cough that up to inconsistent behavior in terms of with professionalism. Maybe that's how we could think about it. But you miss two, then you miss a third in a calendar year. Then the eyeballs start to pop out and people create narratives about, is the athlete doping? And if you turn it to Tobi in particular, they'll say, look at that time. Reducing the world record in the semifinal, running a superior fast time again in the final in Eugene, just over the legal limit. It would have probably been another world record, if memory serves me correctly. And so the eyes come out. Whether or not it's true, whether there's a real case to suspect any of these behaviors, this is what happens. But we don't know if they were going to file an appeal. I suspected they would have. I was talking to some people shortly after, especially people connected to the journalism fraternity in Nigeria. They themselves weren't sure. No one knew because the AIU wasn't giving any indication. They would study it, then say something. But in my mind, I knew they were going to do this only because when the AIU charges you for something, they rarely lose. And so for them, they think the decision, whether this is a drug case in terms of you did take something, whether it's a whereabouts violation, they genuinely rather feel that they have a burden. The bar, rather, to use athletic terms, is really high before they charge. They have to go through a process that they're circumspect in how they do things. They evaluate the process, the methods, sticking to the letter of the rule before they do anything. And I think this is where the Tobi Amusan thing comes into interesting dynamic, because they're thinking that they did nothing wrong. This is how I'm interpreting it, and I can understand why. And so for the tribunal to let her off, then they feel they have grounds to appeal, because this may potentially set precedent. This might showcase maybe inconsistency with the disciplinary tribunal's understanding of things. They might be thinking that way as well. And so they had to do it. I think that's what they would say. And we'll get more of this as the case unfolds. And so Tobi doesn't know this is coming. She might speculate. Maybe her lawyer say, look, this could happen. But you got off, so you feel everything is good. And she continues to end the season, in my mind, in a very good way. Obviously, she won the Diamond League title, just concluded in Oregon, weekend of September 16th, 17th. And so she starts to go back on the circuit, and she wins a massive race. And that's a huge fillip in her corner, I would think, because that would indicate that she would have beaten the likes of the world champion Daniel Williams in that event, the Camacho Quinns, Kendra Harrisons, all the big principal names. And as you know, if you're deep in the sport of track and field, the women's 100-meter hurdles is quite possibly the most competitive event in the sport. It's just an exceptional lineup of talented women on any given day. It's amazing also the closeness in time sometimes and the talent. And when you get a bunch of them injured, you don't even feel like you're watering down the competition. That's how stacked it is. So for Tobi to have concluded the season by winning that title, it would set her up to go into background training, getting a little rest and relaxation, go into background training, and come back and see if she can find her way on top of the podium in Paris at the Olympics. And then we get an appeal filed on September 15, 2023. And the AIU is challenging the decision. They made a decision to do it. So the case moves to the Court for Arbitration for Sport. The AIU will not comment anymore. I suspect we won't get any details either from Amusan on our team. Maybe we'll get a legal speak. But we won't know anything until it goes to CAS. Now, there are some peculiarities with the case as it is, because fundamentally we know nothing. We don't know how she got off. That's things that the AIU didn't reveal, or the tribunal didn't reveal. The athlete herself or her team, immense silence on the issue. And if we go back to the World Championship, as she was going through the rounds, she got a lot of questions about, competing at the last minute, the case, the tribunal ruling in her favor, and so on. But Tobi didn't want to talk about any of these things during the World Championship. And I would say there's two issues with that. One, I understand that fundamentally, because the athlete in question would be in a space to compete. It's major competition. She probably is putting that behind her. Don't necessarily want to talk about that anymore. Or maybe she doesn't deem that as the appropriate space. But if you put yourself in the shoe of journalists and the public, by and large, they want a clear understanding of what's going on. And because we don't have any information, which in this case, according to the Athletics Integrity Unit, is all of Tobi's doing, because it's all right. So if you go to Rule 14.3.4, you'll see that the disclosures are usually determined by the athlete in question. They have a right to keep things transparent. They have a right to keep things behind closed door. They don't necessarily have to give out everything in terms of what happened. In a world like this, we want to see everything. And shout out to Jonathan Gauff from Let'sRun.com, because he had asked the question, and that's how we got a reinforcement that the athlete in question, Tobi Amusan, did not agree to allow things to become public. In terms of the case itself, we would have gotten an understanding of what's going on. If you go from time to time and look at the AIU when they do rulings and so on, or they charge athletes, you can see a lot of details. It varies, but you can see a lot of details. In this case, we don't know anything. And she got off. We don't know how she got off. I can speculate. And since I'm on a podcast and I can talk a little bit more in detail on this, I would think that maybe one of the ways in which she got off was they were able to make a case that maybe the testers did not do enough to find her. It's possible. Maybe there are other things. Did she get off of all 3, 2, 1? And why? We don't know. But they cleared her. Clearly, the AIU didn't want this, or didn't agree with the decision. And so, for us to get more details, and I suspect we'll get more details as things progress, is because by the time the case goes to CAS and they rule on it, we'll get a certain amount of things that can come out, so we can have a broader understanding of the position of the Athletics Integrity Unit, the position of Tobi Amusan in terms of defending her honor and integrity, and what happens. So we'll have to see. It could impact her greatly. Obviously, her credibility as a clean athlete is at stake. Well, maybe not necessarily as a clean athlete. Let me take that back. I think her credibility is at stake because even though she hasn't failed a drug test, it will cast doubts, right? The reputation of the Athletics Integrity Unit is also at stake because it has to be seen as something that's renowned for rigorous case building and not bringing frivolous things to bear. And so I think that's why they are also appealing. I don't know why she didn't release the information if we were to go back to that. It could be under advisement. Legal team says, look, just don't put this out there. You're cleared. We don't need to go through that. There's a process. It's all good. But now there's an appeals process. We want to know more. And I suspect we just have to wait and see, because we're in a space where we want to know. This is a high profile athlete. Does her and her team feel confident going to the court for arbitration for sport? Particularly because the process in place when an athlete has been charged cleared her. An independent process, that is. Does she go into that feeling confident? I don't know. Maybe I would, but I can't, because I don't particularly see the details. If she goes to the court for arbitration in sports and loses, then this is a major problem for her. She could be out of the sport for another couple of years. Who knows what that could do? Obviously, our reputation is at stake, our earning ability, losing some of our good years. So all of those things are problematic. You never want to see this. And obviously in recent years, we've seen a number of these scandals. And I'm calling it a scandal. Raven Saunders, most recently, the Olympic silver medalist, she's suspended for 18 months for whereabouts violations. And it almost seems like a reoccurring issue. There's a Randolph Ross case as well. And most of these things are avoidable. I've done videos on this. I've just expressed my opinion on this in a number of instances, especially for a high-profile athlete. That is particularly crucial to stay updated and with your atoms. You must regularly update your atoms. Your whereabouts is a crucial part of the integrity of the sport. And I put it to you that no sport is tainted by drug use more than track and field. It's remarkable how one or two instances can make people who don't even really understand the sport or follow the sport that deeply think that everybody's on drugs. Do those same people make the similar case for the NFL, for association football, real football, however you want to term it? Do they make rugby, all of these places? All of these places also are institutions, follow procedures around doping. They all have connections to WADA. There's testing practices, and I'll get to one of those later on in the likes of Paul Pogba as it relates to football. But I put it to you, and I've heard this before. I've heard this from serious journalists too, that, oh, doping doesn't improve you as a footballer or whatever. And it often makes me, it baffles me that people would say that, because it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what performance enhancing drugs can do, especially if we're thinking about areas of rest and recovery and allowing you to train harder and all these different things, right? Maybe you need some innate talent. All of these people are professionals, so they have innate talent, so they're trying to figure out ways to get ahead. And so we've seen a lot of doping things in other sport. It doesn't taint the sport, I believe, the same way as in the case of track and field. And that's why it comes back down now to me being very concerned about this. Likewise, other things. Again, I should say, Tobi Amusan has not tested positive for any substance that's deemed to have enable her to perform better. None. But there's a crucial part of the sport in terms of your whereabouts, and that is that question. And it just creates more questions than we have answers for. And this public perception of high-profile athletes just always on drugs will continue when high-profile athletes miss tests. And this is the challenge here. I really hope that this ends well for Tobi, because I would rather take, as a lover of the sport, that there was issues with the process of the AIU. I wouldn't like it because I don't want them to be making mistakes. They should be above board as well. But I would rather that's the case than an athlete deliberately missing tests. And we know that athletes deliberately miss tests. There's reports on it. Heck, even our own countrywoman, Blessing Akabari, if you look at the Eric Lira Akabari case under the Rodchenkov Act here in the United States, and the seizures of the phone logs and so on, it reveals that at one point, the testers are at the door for Akabari, and she doesn't know whether she can take the test because she may get caught. And so she misses it. That's a deliberate thing. I'm not saying Tobi did this or other athletes do this, but that's what happens when we're at one extreme of people making a deliberate attempt to violate the integrity of the sport. I do trust that's not the case here and that she will be successful, and it will happen in a speedy manner that will allow her, once she gets off vacation, to get back to preparation. But that's my thoughts on it. It was coming in terms of the appeal. I just don't think they would sit and not appeal the case. And so lawyers will be making some more money. And hopefully we get to see more of the details later. Hopefully we get a proper press conference as well. It doesn't even have to be the athlete in question. It could be her representatives. And so we can appreciate all the things around this, what ultimately is an unfortunate event. All right. And so that's where I am here. And since I'm talking about doping, let me just, or anti-doping and so on, let me bring up another sport, another athlete that has recently gotten into problems. Let's talk about Paul Pogba and his doping dilemma. The way I'm thinking about it so far, the way in which they've been presenting it, is this idea of a thin line between contamination and intention. So Paul Pogba, as you know, a really talented footballer, won the World Cup for France, was a key important figure there, was at the Manchester United Academy, left for Juventus, had a very good career there, came back in a world record fee to Manchester United. That didn't go as well. Won some trophies, but that didn't go as well. Part of that too is the general decline of that great club, which we'll talk about as well. Some of it, Pogba got a lot of blame. He gets a lot of stick in the media. Even the British press still puts a lot of coverage time on him. For what reason, I don't know. Graham Souness, former Liverpool player, pundit, just seems to have a personal vendetta against Pogba. All of that stuff. So Pogba is a media story of course. Some of it is his own making because he's a dynamic figure. He also has his own way of putting himself in the midst of everything. He's a brand. A very good footballer, probably a great footballer at moments, having a little bit of a decline right now. And let's talk about his case because, we left the Tobi Amusan case, let's talk about his. And so, recently, he was subjected to some tests because he's back at Juventus, as many people know, not having the best of season. Last year, I don't think he hardly played, he was injured a lot. And he gets into the pool of testing, and the test reveals the presence of testosterone. Well, testosterone in your body is not a bad thing at first, because your body produces that. But it's not just the production of testosterone that's within the system. It's testosterone from a synthetic source, exogenous, as they would say. I'm having a little bit of problems pronouncing stuff right now. Don't know why. So in simple form, the test revealed that the testosterone isn't from his own body. Right? How they do this, you have to think about testosterone as having family members if you want to get into the scientific parts of it, or there's derivatives. So when it's naturally produced by the body, there's like a distinct molecular signature that we can find on tests, but his test suggested that the testosterone that came back in the test was from an external source. Now, Pogba is claiming that a friend of his gave him supplements in Miami, which potentially could be the source, which means that it could be a contaminated supplement. However, there's been reports out there in the media that the supplement he took had a warning label saying that it might contain testosterone. So if that's true, then it's a significant game changer here, because you could read it. But even if, and the only thing that contaminated sources can do for you, especially assuming that there's no label saying there's testosterone on it, which some people are disputing that it might be on the label. The only thing that if it's from a contaminated source and you could turn that over and so on and say you didn't know, is that it might reduce the amount of time you may be serving for this violation. Usually that's the case. In track and field, it might be different. In football, there's cases of athletes getting off of this, I believe, in other sports. But the only problem is that, like track and field or any sport, the principle from WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, is that everything is about strict liability, in the sense that athletes are responsible for the substances in their body, no matter how it got there. That is the crux of the matter here. So he can try to find a way to say he's innocent by showing that's contaminated. And every athlete does this a lot. You know, immediately, well, I took something, it was in the beef, it was in the food, it was this. We can bring up cases of this. But let's say that's the case, then it might reduce the time if he can prove that, look, I did not deliberately take it. So is it a thin line between intention and contamination? That's how I'm kind of thinking through this. I am not quite sure what the relationship, and I should look into this, in football as it pertains to supplement companies being approved. In track and field, for example, there are labs, or not labs, there are manufacturers rather, that are on approved lists. You know, if you're in the United States, USADA might, which is the US Anti-Doping Agency, they have a list of companies, this all over the world, and say that are approved that you can take those substances. It shouldn't contain any banned substances. But were that to happen, because there can be contamination in production facilities, were that to happen and you have a particular batch and they test that batch and they realize, oh, that's contaminated, you should have been just getting protein, but you also got something else that can aid your performance, then usually in cases like that, the athlete would not be charged, because that lab has also gone through an authorization process and supposedly known to be clean. Their ingredients are produced in a way that should not have contamination. And in that case, the athlete didn't necessarily make that mistake. And so that's why a lot of athletes, you can see them now, they're signing up to companies that the best place to take supplements are from companies that are approved. I don't know how that works, particularly in football, and I should look into that. But the stakes are very high for Paul Pogba. If he cannot provide a compelling defense, then he could be out for 4 years. Does Paul Pogba have 4 years left? I mean, this could potentially send him right into the retirement. I mean, 4 years potentially at the competitive level, Champions League, still plying his trade for France. We've already seen this decline after he left Manchester United. Some would say the decline started there. And then he's getting to a point where, you know, he's been injured a lot and he's trying to come back, right? And so there's a number of things here. We have to think about the science behind the testing. I think the testosterone test is important. It's done well. It's not like the blood doping one, which I can get into for another day. But supplement industries, as we know, are not regulated. Sometimes a lot of nonsense happens there, and so you have to be very careful. He's an influential player. I think there was an interesting statement that his team put out recently. I think it was his manager or so, his agent rather, Rafaela Pimenta, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. At the point in which they put out that statement, they were awaiting the second sample and cannot really give an opinion until they get the second sample tested. So that would be the B sample. You know, there's always 2 samples when you do testing like that. The A and B, usually nothing changes. There might be an adverse finding between both, and that can get an athlete off. At the time of recording, I have not seen an update on the test. At least I haven't, to be honest, I haven't seen one. And, you know, the consistent arguments about him not intentionally doing this. And it's possible that he didn't intentionally take things. It's possible that athletes are in a circle of trust with others and they take whatever other people who they know to trust give them. But with the strict liability case, it doesn't matter. You have to be the one to do this. So sometimes you have to do more. Sometimes you have to be more vigilant. More due diligence is necessary. You can't always venerate people and expect certain people to be in these elevated positions. Who are these people, right? You know, you have to test. You have to make sure. There should be a checklist. He's an extremely rich individual in terms of his ability to hire a proper team. You know, so if this was a mistake, they need a strong case for it, I would say. So it's tough times for him, and I'm not quite sure where that will land him at the end. But hopefully we'll get an answer to the Paul Pogba case soon. Speaking of answers, I want to spend a little time and talking about the frenzy, the effect, whatever you want to call it, the prime effect. I want to talk about Deon Sanders, prime time, you know, Coach Prime as he's now going by, and what he's doing on the Colorado Buffaloes, and his transformational impact. You probably could think about it as transformational. Certainly a fresh impact, a new style to Division I athletics in the United States, which is big business. Not only Division I, a Power 5 conference, although the conference he's in is being folded and they'll move to another conference. But I want to talk about it because Deon Sanders is something special. Phenomenal player as an individual when he was a sportsman. Two-sport professional. You know, he could run track. He could play basketball well. He was just one of those once in a generational type of athlete that developed a level of persona, which, if you follow the story well or know the history, it was something he probably made up, but it becomes part of him. It's a mystique. It's his brand, and brand is a thing. And so right now, if you're watching this or you're not even interested in college football here in the States, it's hard not to see what's going on, right? Some people think it's a circus. Some people think it's a breath of fresh air. It's all sort of things happening here. It's amazing. The kind of electricity around watching a pre-game show. It's like a red carpet for who's who coming to these games. The Rock, you name them. The anticipation, the crowds there at the games in Colorado in particular, the 2 home games they had recently. It's garnered significant attention on a program that, let's be honest, was considered one of the worst in college football. One of the worst in the Power 5 conferences. And the kind of turnaround that's happening there, at the time of recording, they're 3-0. They've already beaten the runner-up from last year's national title, TCU. They've beaten a Big Ten powerhouse in Nebraska. They had an in-state rivalry last week with Colorado State, went double overtime, and, his son led them on a 98-yard drive, something like that. But everything is about Deon Saunders, I think. I think Saunders is an interesting kind of individual, right? It's the media attraction. He is big time. Big time. When I say big time, he's bringing everything to them. He has his own media, his own social media. You can follow him. It's like tons of cameras around Deon. He has a message out there. He's wearing glasses. He's selling stuff. He's fly. He's everything. He's doing things that you're not seeing any other Division I college coach do. He's taken over the attention from all the big time guys. Your Nick Sabans, whoever you want to bring. He's just different. And it's working. I don't particularly like the institution of college athletics in the United States, and that's for another discussion. But the media attention is ridiculous. And he's everywhere. He appeared in 60 Minutes last week. As many of you know, 60 Minutes is a CBS News hour show. It's been around for years. And it nearly attracted over 12 million views. That's the best viewership since, I think, 2021 or somewhere around there. The game viewership is up. The Colorado State game was the 5th most watched football game ever on ESPN across their platforms for a regular season game. No one saw this coming. I think it's mostly Deon. I don't think people even think about the team as being that good still. They're on a 3-0 run. I don't want to downplay their performance. But no one is anticipating this. Ticket sales are out the roof. University all-time history. Sold out games. People are buying, just want to be there. Spending loads of money to buy tickets from others. The merchandise revenue is going up. You go on all these sites, Fanatics, whoever, all of that stuff. They're selling out everything. Coach Prime has a Nike collaboration, and all his clothes, whatever he's selling is gone. He has an eyeglasses lineup. He's giving away eyeglasses on TV. Everybody's there. Your Shannon Sharps, your Stephen A. Smith, First Take. All the ESPN guys are up there. Pat McAfee show. It's, as the young people say, it's a vibe. It's something else. We've never seen the like in college sports in recent years. He's bringing an attention to this that we have to wonder what the effect may be, right? What will happen? What is the impact of this? Some people are already talking about whether or not he's going to last it, how long he's going to be there, because it's only a matter of time before maybe he gets pipped off from a bigger program. I mean, the city of Colorado is talking about, the state of Colorado rather, is talking about the revenue. There's all these numbers being floating around. Economists are making models, whoever, airlines, packed, people coming to the games, hotels, restaurants, everything is there, right? And it's like a family affair. His children are there as well. Shador and Shiloh play for him. I think he has a daughter that's also playing basketball there. And there's this YouTube frenzy because they are also controlling their own brand. And the thing about it is his style and swagger. Prime doesn't change. You have to accept him. And no one would anticipate that would happen. It doesn't strike me as he's conforming to any kind of norms or established practices that the University of Colorado would want to be upheld. I guess they probably wouldn't have hired him if they did their due diligence. They saw what he did at Jackson. They saw what he did as a professional player. He has that cool factor. He doesn't code switch. He's just speaking like it is. His mother's in the locker room. He's bringing all these people for inspirational speeches, and recently said he's just, 7 guys away from probably being the best team in college sports. Can he do it? Not quite sure. He is the brand. He is the draw. He says he can tell people about how to get NIL deals, name, image, and likeness. For those of you who aren't familiar, recent ruling some years ago allowing athletes in collegiate sports to capitalize on their own image. Important transformation, especially if you understand the structure of college sports where the athletes get nothing and it's $1 billion industry. Talk about that for another time. Not everybody likes his coaching philosophy, but it's working so far. There's this new transfer portal system in collegiate sports. It's not only what he's doing, but everybody's doing it. People are moving, and he's trying to get a team that can maybe play in his own image. And so number of fantastic things are going on there. It's different. And you wonder if he's opening up the way. And this is where I wanted to bring up this. What is the prime effect? Because it's not only about maybe if they're going to win or you can get revenue and all of that stuff. What is it doing to the landscape of coaching in collegiate athletics? Will it start to change? Will you start to get different types of characters? Will it open up for more head coaches with a bravado and style, particularly African-American coaches? We'll have to see. But so far, all the attention is there. How long it lasts, only time will tell. It will get harder. But he's a believer guy. He's a motivation guy. He's getting these guys to overperform. He's getting more of guys who are not as talented or heavily recruited that are at some of the bigger institutions, the likes of Alabama, Michigan, Ohio State, Clemson. Some of these guys wouldn't have gotten into anywhere in some of those teams, and he's gotten a lot out of them. And his son is also, looks like he might be a star as well. So only time will tell. It's interesting. Will it shift? Will people want to go there just because of how it works? How they want to play with him, play for him because he's a different type of a coach than they're used to? I mean, it's like a star-study event. A rapper is bringing people out on the field. It's something else. People are flying in just to see it. Red carpet affair. And if one man is getting the most out of, players, maybe another guy is struggling to do that at one of the giants at one of the giant sporting institutions. And I want to transition and talk about what's happening at Manchester United. The kind of immense pressure right now it seems Erik ten Hag is having in his second season. 3 games without a win. Most latest at the time of recording was the defeat to Bayern Munich, or at Bayern Munich, that 4-3 defeat, which on the surface sometimes might look close, but it was far from it. There's all these reports now. There are reports about leaks and rifts in the dressing room and all manner of things. Because Manchester United is quite possibly the biggest brand around. Even when they're not winning, they're still, it's unbelievable. New Adidas brand, new, shirt deal recently, new shirt sponsor coming on the front of the shirt, record breaking, all that stuff. I don't know, I could spend 16 hours talking about the state of Manchester United. And is the club in crisis at this moment? Are people thinking about this as being overblown? I'm going to say a couple things, or maybe a little bit more couple things, and try to distill this. Because it's right now it's all over the place. The first thing is Ten Hag is the right man for the job. You cannot have a better coach right now, a better manager. And the work that he's doing, he must be allowed to do it in order to turn around this club. And I'll get back to that. But let's pause that for a second. I think no matter what we're seeing on the pitch, what's going on, everything stems from the Glazers. I've said it a million times. I'm not the first to say it. Everybody's out there saying it. Until those guys leave, the fortunes of this great club will only be incremental. You might see a trend upwards on the graph, then it's going to drop down and come back up. And that has been the constant since Sir Alex Ferguson left. The people have been protesting the Glazers for the 17 years or whatever. They bought the club on a leverage buyout that's no longer legal. Never put a single penny in. It can't be done again. But they had a man who was always winning, and so they could hide behind that. And they talked about selling the club or maybe putting it up for sale and whatever, and it's not happening. It's been dragged out, and everything that's happening there is a product of that. Until those guys go, you could put Pep Guardiola, you could put Mourinho, you could put all of them in one, Sir Alex Ferguson, create a new AI brain. It will not fix the crisis there. The club is rotten to the core, and Ten Hag has come in and he's seen some stuff that is just unbelievable for a big club like Manchester United. Right now, Richard Arnold is the new CEO taking over from the ridiculous work of Ed Woodward. Didn't know football from baseball. The stadium is in terrible state. The pitch, the training ground, the facilities, it's just ridiculous. You see Real Madrid new stadium coming up and all of these clubs that even might waste money or do frivolous stuff, but they still always think football first. These Glazers don't care. They're fine with not winning, because as long as they can still make money by taking out shares and selling whatever they want to sell, they're fine. And the club is saddled with tremendous debt. And then you had Jazim wanting to buy Sheikh Jazim or Jim Ratcliffe and all these things, and everything is stalling. There's a big article in the Athletic with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who had to promise not to want more players in the second season or whatever, or limit the amount of players he's going to get. And we've seen it in place too for Erik ten Hag. Loses Ronaldo last year. Get Weghorst, a loan deal, Sabitzer loan deal. They're not making any moves to move the club forward. and he did a tremendous amount of job. Now this year, I think part of the reason why the team hasn't kicked on is largely with injuries. Like 12 players out. But obviously the club has a lot of issues. The Greenwood issue is an issue. It's clear they wanted him back until there's backlash publicly. They didn't handle that in anywhere close to the right way. Whether or not you said you had good care for the lad, even after he made a mistake, or whether you should have gotten rid of him long before. You didn't handle it well. You should have done that independently with a commission or something of the sort. Then there's the Anthony thing, who's now, has been accused of multiple kind of abusive situations. He says he's innocent. He's been given time off. There's the Jadon Sancho thing. You look at the game the other day and you could see some players are not working hard enough. It's okay to lose, but if you're not doing the right things. And clearly he's not getting the support he wants. There's limitations on the budget. Everybody knew that 2 strikers were needed this year. Harry Kane should have been bought. There's no report suggesting that the Glazers don't want him or whoever think he's no value for money or whatever. They should have bought him and Højlund together. You only got one. A lot of dithering. Talking about money, complicated deals on loan to get certain players. Richard Arnold talking to the staff the other day about there's a strategic review going on. People are really concerned. The fans are concerned. People who work at the club are concerned about the state of the club. Everything will remain the same, and they may only look half good only because Ten Hag is doing some work, or if you got another manager. The club cannot realize its true potential until the Glazers leave. And it's not clear that they're going anywhere. Because they're valuing the club at something different. And we must remember these people understand what it means to be in a cartel of clubs. The NFL is structured in a no regulation system. They don't even have to win every year. The revenue sharing model. One team does better, you become better. Manchester United is a cash cow. They can sell everything from faucets to wine. And so they look at the situation and people are in their ears telling them like, look, the valuation might be 10 billion in some years to come. No club is worth that. But, they're looking at all these investment groups telling them nonsense and consultant firms, and they're holding out because they want more money. And the next person who takes over Manchester United, if these guys eventually decide to sell, will have to invest tremendous amount of capital just to put the club back on anywhere par. When you think about the kind of rivals it has in world football, the question of a stadium is important. Either you're going to get a brand new one or spend significant money. It's not going to, you can't see it being less than $1.5 billion or so, or £1 billion just to even renovate the thing. You're getting a brand new stadium that can run you, especially if you think about a fan base and how big you can get that to be, anywhere from 2-point-something billion onwards. Training ground, different facilities, then getting player recruitment right. It will take a lot of time and investment. You think these people care? So I could come here and we can break down what's going on. We know there are injuries. I think that's a serious thing. There are some rifts going on. The harmony in the club can't be right now in the dressing room. Not everybody's probably happy with Ten Hag. He's not free from blame either. Maybe in the Brighton game, he probably made some tactical errors. I don't want to get into that point. I think all of those things that we're looking to the side and the bottom and everything, we have to look at the top and see that the structure, those guys need to go. And if we don't get rid of them, then nothing good will happen. It's just really bad. Really, really bad. Anyway, you hope it will turn around. I mean, I know I'm a sports talk tech guy and I'm supposed to be independent, but this is a club I love as well. And so I often spend a little time talking about it, and I can spend a lot more time talking about it as well. And that might be for another podcast. I'm going to thank you everyone for being with me still. I'm going to go through a few more things quickly before I wrap it up here. I want to talk about this interesting new tech that we're seeing coming through. So David Ornstein also, I think in The Athletic, wrote an article about wearable lower limb tracking system awarded FIFA certification for use in official matches for the first time. And so there's this innovation in player tracking that is in the mix. We might be able to put up the article. It's behind a paywall, but it's also in other places as well. That's not behind a paywall. But they're moving, as you know, there's all these tracking going on for player safety, for data, for performance, tactics, and all of that stuff. And I saw an interesting one this week where usually when you track players, it's always a body wearing thing, upper body tracking systems like with GPS. Now you're focusing more on lower limb tracking, which allows you for a much more comprehensive understanding of player movement and also their technical ability. That's what they're looking. So there's attachment there on the football shoe behind it, and it will track the lower limbs, and it can provide some detailed insights about footwork, the player's ball control, and other kind of skills that might be necessary for development and coaching. It's been tested in MLS, it's been tested at other clubs, it's a lower level football, and now FIFA is now saying that they can get it there, right? They established, FIFA has this tracking system or a technological system component of the organization that thinks about the advancing tech, and player safety is paramount for them. And so, it took them a while to do this review process, but it's coming. And so we're going to get more data, which is important, I imagine, to tell us a number of things. I suspect that might lead to more data-driven sorts of things that can help for coaching, the kicking velocity, kind of technical balance. These things could really revolutionize coaching methods, particularly at the lower level, could also impact at the higher level as well, and maybe for player development and strategy. So there's a number of things there. It's neat enough that it could potentially, in a mass scale, end up on everybody's radar at some point. FIFA thinks, they also think about the cost efficiency of these products and whether it could injure players. And it seems safe enough. It's just an attachment on the bottom of the boot. It doesn't seem as if it will do anything deleterious in any way. But yeah, that's the new tech that I saw coming out that I wanted to talk about briefly, and we'll see. It's going to be interesting, let's hope it works. So we'll try to put up the article or put the article in the show notes for sure to let you know what's going on. But yeah, this is a lovely kind of landscape here. I really appreciate you sticking around if you're still here on the podcast. I'm going to end the show briefly by talking about the state of tennis. Most recently, Coco Gauff won her maiden championship there. Novak Djokovic winning his 24th title. And so the US Open was really good because in the last few years, if you've been following the sport of tennis, it's massive following. In the US in particular, there was also thought of there's a decline in interest, but globally it's still massive. In the US, it's still massive. And there was concerns about that. And this past US Open broke all sorts of numbers. It might be a Coco Gauff sensation thing. She's talented. She broke on the scene some years ago, but there's a lot of fans in the stands back if you watch the tennis. It was electric. We haven't seen the like. She's done some stuff that, maybe we haven't seen the kind of frenzy since maybe 1999 with Serena Williams or the Williams sisters in general. And there's all these people coming out. The stars were there. Your Jimmy Butler's, your Kevin Durant. Hollywood was there. Nicole Kidman, Spike Lee, Diane Keaton. All these people were there. Djokovic, on the other hand, was also fantastic. But the US Open in particularly broke a lot of numbers, over 950,000 fans in that kind of a 2.5 into 3 week period. Every session at Ashe Stadium, every session at Ashe Stadium was sold out. Attendance was 8% up from last year. So US tennis is having a moment. Coco Gauff, I think, is leading the way. And let's see what this young prodigy might do. But at the same time, when we think about tennis, we have to think about that it's fantastic. The TV numbers are up. Everybody, you can go, it's accessible to watch, maybe not to play everywhere around the world. But the money is not anywhere close to what it needs to be. You know, there are some interesting reports in the New York Times. Vox had something on, players that are in the top 100, or if they're ranked out of the top 100, how difficult it is to be competitive and be in those spaces and try to move up. Most of the money ends up going to only a select few. There's a lot of division in terms of thinking about tennis. There is the major Grand Slams, which are separate entities. Then there's the women's tennis, the WTA, the men's tennis. And nobody's all singing from the same song sheet in order to garner certain television rights or other kind of sponsorship. And tennis is a sport in particular that could potentially make a lot more money. It's liked by many. It's just that they haven't figured out a way to get the kind of revenue structure. When you think about a global star like a Djokovic or Alcaraz or anybody you want to think about, Coco Gauff, the status they have and the eyes that are on them, the money that they receive pales in comparison to NFL players, basketball players, soccer players. I mean, obviously the soccer eye is even massive. So there's work to be done on the business side there. We'll get into much more of this, but I thought I had to end the podcast by just, quickly talking about that. Guys, I really appreciate you on this podcast. I know that there's a number of sporting things that I like to cover, and let me know in the comments your thoughts on today, the things that I covered, and if you agree with me, that's great. If you don't, I love to hear from you, and I appreciate everybody watching. Subscribe to the channel. I have a number of other things on the channel as well, but I'm going to be doing a podcast where it allows me to speak more about number of sporting issues. So I know some people might be only interested in a particular topic, but hopefully you'll like the podcast and stay engaged, and then we'll put this stuff out. So I appreciate you, and you stay tuned, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.